not have their profit restricted. At some point, whether you're working on criminal justice, racial matters, union matters, healthcare, education, elections, at some point you run your head against a brick wall of personhood, because those are the things that are restricting and limiting what we are able to accomplish in improving our society and becoming a truly anti-racist, equal rights, but all factors that are made problems by corporate person. In every deliberation, we must consider the impact on the seventh generation. Meaning that our society has to focus only as far as the end of the current quarter, or even the end of the day. I become more and more concerned about what kind of world we're leaving for our kids, our grandkids. A few months ago, Pope Francis published his challenging encyclical. Have any of you read it? I read through that, yes, all the way from start to finish. It is amazing. Many of the ideas and convictions that came from him, I did not expect to come from the head of the world's largest Christian faith. Climate change is real. Human activities are largely responsible for it. Economic activity involving corporate greed is the primary active force contributing to it. Most important, people of faith have a duty to act. Future generations are counting on us. He also said, and this kind of echoes the Iroquois principle when he says, what kind of a world do we want to leave to those who come after us, to children who are now growing up? Whether believers or not, we are agreed today that the earth is essentially a shared inheritance whose fruits are meant to benefit everyone. Respect for the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part. He doesn't just say, or we humans and animals, or we humans and plants, it's all existence. The language I tend to use, Gaia, our home, is the interdependent web, and we are just one of many, many parts of it. If we come together out of a common feeling of love for our home, for each other as human beings, and for our future generations, it cannot help but become the most powerful force on the planet. The greed that is built into our current economy, it's literally changing our planet, our climate, and creating an untenable future. We broke away from the British Empire because of the greed of all of the corporations that were dominating us. The colonies were corporations with their governors being a CEO. It was all for the purpose of bringing wealth to the king. Or I expect you probably know, we couldn't make our own clothes. We could grow cotton using slaves, but we had to send the cotton to England to turn it into clothes. General Washington had to hunt around for a suit when he was made president because he couldn't find any American-made suits here. So that was our situation. So basically what we did by kicking them out was we decolonized ourselves. We did away with having corporations mentioned. They are not in the Constitution. Corporations were chartered by state. They were approved by state legislators. They had to serve a public use to the society. They had a specific expiration date, which could be renewed. They could not own other corporations. They could not use money to pay for judiciary or legislators, and they could be revoked for cause, and they frequently were. Then along came the Civil War. Railroads opened up the continent, generated enormous wealth for very few people. Does that sound familiar? The monetary flow began to the judiciary and the legislature, and they gradually changed the charters to the point where their charters were significantly weakened. Today, a charter for a corporation basically says only one obligation of a corporation is to return a profit for its shareholders. That's it. In 1886, with the Santa Clara County versus the Southern Pacific Railroad, which is a simple tax issue, nothing even really to do with personhood. The clerk of the court was a former railroad president, and he and others on the court had an interest in giving the railroads more power. So he included in the headnote of the the case. The headnote is supposed to be a summary of what's in the case, in case the lawyers are too lazy to look into it. He included in that the statement, we do not disagree with the right of corporations to have access to this right. In fact, we all agree that they do. That was never said in the case. It was discussed around beer and drinks by the judges because they were all of that opinion, but it was not in the case. He put this into the headnote so it could become a precedent for all future cases, and it started the train rolling. The 14th Amendment is what this was all about. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Now that's fine for people. When you start applying it to corporations with their unlimited funds and their lobbying and their lawyers, it becomes a whole different thing. Well, in the first 50 years after it's passed, and this is Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black who made the statement, of the cases that came before the Supreme Court around the 14th Amendment, only 1/2 of 1% of them involved Negroes. That was who it was written for. Over 50% extended benefits to corporations. First Amendment freedom of speech meant that corporations did not have to pay taxes on advertising. Fourth, a warrant was needed to enter premises, protection from search and seizure, which meant all kinds of injustices started happening because if you had to have a court order or a search warrant to go into my place, usually that gave me time to clean up whatever it was that was wrong. The companies started getting away with things. Fifth Amendment, which we think of as free speech, but it's also known as the Takings Clause because it said that you cannot take from me what is my right, and in this case, my rights were profit. So today we're hearing cases all over the place where corporations are suing because of a perceived loss of profit from a certain event. TPP, everybody know what that is?
Yeah.
NAFTA, everybody knows what that is? That's one of the core elements of those two treaties. And corporations around the world, today it's just Mexico, the States, and Canada, are suing cross-border when somebody in another jurisdiction tries to prevent them from doing something that they want to do, which is perfectly fine for them, but is against the rules in that state or that country, and they win because NAFTA and now the TPP, if it comes through, are very clear that if you take an action that will reduce the potential profit of somebody who wants to do business in your jurisdiction, you have to pay for the lost profit. The sum of all these court-granted rights means that we, the people, have been, in effect, recolonized. We are again under the domination of corporations. In 1976, with Buckley versus Vallejo, money was made the equivalent of speech. This expanded the First Amendment protection to include financial contributions to candidates. Then in 2010, the straw that broke the camel's back. What happened in 2010?
Citizens United.
You could spend any amount of money in favor of or against any federal election. That's the House, the Senate, the presidency. I think they calculated the potential of $3 million could be invested if you invested all of the federal elections. And it doesn't have to be disclosed.
In Kent, we brought a community bill of rights to the ballot, charter amendment, which would have prohibited the extraction of hydrocarbons within Kent. And it was defeated, largely due to a campaign against it.
Campaigns, paying money into publicity for or against any case. Millionaires said, well, why should I be limited to $22,000 globally to go to campaigns? And the Supreme Court agreed, removed all limits, still the maximum per campaign, but now you can spend up to $3 million on supporting directly every candidate. So it's gone crazy in the last few years, and that's what we have today. And the Supreme Court decided all these things, which means that you can't pass legislation to negate it. It takes a constitutional amendment. A constitutional amendment is required to reverse something done by the Supreme Court.
Couldn't a future Supreme Court decision reverse it as well?
Good.
Okay.
Do you expect that's likely under
Not the current makeup of the court, no.
Just want to mention happy outcome of our election the week before last. I managed to official statement from the city to Congress saying that the voters of the city want a constitutional amendment saying that corporations are not equal.
But last I heard, no citizens' initiative around the country around Move to Amend has been defeated, which pretty much shows you the interest of the public when they know about it to do something like this, to get this passed. Back to constitutional amendment, that's what it's going to take. Now, since the Citizens United, that's when Move to Amend came into effect, I started working on corporate personhood back in 2000. There was nothing to bring us together at that point, just my understanding of this is terrible. But Move to Amend, a national coalition of organizations and individuals, is working to get a constitutional amendment that says the corporations are not persons and money is not speech, because both of those things must be done if we're to make change. People are going crazy these days about abolishing Citizens United. That doesn't do it. All that does is bring us back to 2010. It doesn't address the underlying situation of corporate person. People say, oh yeah, we're going to revoke Citizens United. I say, well, that's nice. But it's going to screw it up from making a real change, because we're only going to get one chance at an amendment on this issue. If it's being pushed by so many people, that means that it's in the interests of the money to have it revoked. In other words, they don't really care. They've got their bed anyway. It's not going to affect them that much. They're still going to be able to use all the other things. McCutcheon, for instance, isn't part of that, to get their way in elections. So, no, let's go for the corporate personhood and money is speech.
You kind of restrict yourself by using the name corporation. Would it not be better to use a more generic term such as legal entity so that there's not a loophole about it?
It could be. There will be changes to this before we get to an amendment. This is the concept, though. This is the idea. And it's non-profit as well as for-profit. Because remember that Citizens United is a non-profit. These super PACs are non-profits, supposedly.
The wording of our charter amendment defined corporations as, not as corporations per se, but PACs, super PACs, non-profits, and unions.
Yeah, unions are included, sure. And unions, the money they put into things compared to what corporations do, which is minuscule. So some unions are a little concerned, but some of them have said, yeah, bring it on. We don't need that. Okay, so what does all this have to do with climate change? The corporate lobbyists who write our laws and our agency regulations ensure that profits and potential for growth are in no way impeded by such unimportant matters as environmental or social concerns. The fossil fuel industry was aware in 1980 that CO2 emissions continuing would cause climate change, but they chose to hide it. So they fight against incentives for alternative and renewable energy sources because their business model requires continued sales and use of their products. What happens when a solar energy or a wind farm gets put into operation? The cash flow that the extracting company today gets goes away. So they can't afford, or they think they can't afford, to have these alternative sources going forward. Energy independence, that's the big cry these days. Oh, wonderful, we're heading towards energy independence. That was our objective for so long. We're doing it, though, on the back of fracking. Fracking and other technologies like that are what are being used to potentially give us energy, so-called energy independence, and at what cost. As we've heard in Athens and Akron and other cities, you can't even prevent a fracking or a waste disposal from coming into your city because it's a state decision. And of course the corporations manage to lobby that into our Columbus legislature so that you have no control over your own city unless you get into community civil legal defense law. In addition to accelerating climate change, corporate personhood has led to worsening situations in a host of other fields. Economic justice, criminal justice, inequality, voting rights, reproductive justice, labor unions, the social safety net, education, immigration, peacemaking, and on and on. These are all issues impacted negatively from our perspective by corporate personhood. Like me personally, are not against corporations. Corporations have done a tremendous amount of good in developing our country, but they should not be doing it as persons who have control over us. Today we have an oligarchy because of the control they have. The corporations I worked for, looking in retrospect, I can see the things that we were doing that contributed to this problem. If we don't change this situation, I think everything else is moot. Predictions of when the temperatures will be too high, when the water will be so much higher than it is today, They started out saying by the end of the century, they're now saying, 2050. I saw in the paper today that they're predicting that parts of Yemen, Saudi Arabia, and others in that area not only will be miserably hot, they will not allow human residents without round-the-clock air conditioning. It said your sweat would not be able to be taken off of your body quick enough to prevent you from dying of the heat. People of faith and ethical convictions have a duty to act. Are we acting today? Yeah, I would argue that a lot of the things we're doing today are acting in that direction. But are they really? Are they going to cause systemic change? We'll get change here, law there, maybe a regulation that improves things. In some cases here in Ohio, I understand it was in Athens that passed a law in their city legislature against fracking. But that goes against the state. So if it's questioned, it's out there. But could we act? What is holding us back? Many of us are persuaded there's nothing we can do other than small adjustments and perhaps writing our representatives. Our local and national non-governmental organizations tend to focus on these approaches. Petitions, writing to your legislature, getting groups together. Or maybe do we just believe that things get too bad? Well, technology will find the answer after all, it always has. A poem I use when talking to communities of faith is a reading from our hymnal Beginners by Denise Levertov. We have only begun. And then she enumerates, to love the earth, to envision how it might be to live as siblings with beast and flower and not as oppressors. And 3, to know the power that is in us if we would join our solitudes in the communion of struggle. Do we know the power that is in us? Well, certainly there's a power within us that comes from our faith and its beliefs and working together. But I'm talking about the power that we have as being the first 3 letters of our Constitution. We the people confirms that we have established that document, and in Article 5 it provides for several alternative means to amend it. So the very Constitution that corporations today enjoy access to provides that means. A constitutional amendment could eliminate corporate personhood and money as speech, the 2 realities that give them their power. It's not easy, but it's doable. We've done 27 of them. We want to do a 28. There's somebody that is a numbers game. When enough people want the change, we can make it happen. And that enough is many millions. But if we get together and do it, nobody can say, no, you can't do that. There it is in the Constitution, Article 5. Hey, we've done it if we get the numbers. We are the government. And we are the state. So how do we get there? This is my mantra. Hope. It's about hope. And it was attributed to Moses Maimonides, a 12th century Jewish scholar. Hope is belief in the plausibility of the possible as opposed to the necessity of the probable. So, is it possible to reverse climate change? I expect that if we believed that it was not possible, we wouldn't be here. So can we agree that we believe that it's possible? That if we come together in action by means yet to be determined, we can reverse it or at least slow down its process. That's the possible. What's the probable? Business as usual. That is to say, profit as usual at the expense of everything else. So now, who is this we? Stewards of creation or of the earth and of all its beings. You've surely been hearing the climate deniers, in many cases funded by the fossil fuel industry, that rant against the reality of climate change, and some very small minority of individuals of certain fundamental faiths that say God is in charge because when he wants it, the raindrop falls, a bird sings. Who are we to be so presumptuous as to think we can influence God's creation with our puny actions? What we probably don't hear much is, in the national press, are the committed leaders of the major religions in this country, including evangelical, Southern Baptist, and fundamentalist Christian denominations, some of whose members are among the deniers who clearly see themselves as stewards of the earth with a duty worded this way: we must consider ourselves to be caretakers of the planet and all its beings. And of course, religions clearly exhibit many differences from each other. Some of these are foundational. In many cases, they would thwart the finding of common ground. But let me give you a logic train. But if and when we agree to come together around our common belief that we must be responsible stewards of the planet, number two, we come to realize that through the passage of a constitutional amendment to eliminate corporate personhood and money as speech, we can then produce the change we need to turn climate around. Then we can agree to set aside these huge differences we have and to make that happen. And in many cases, we are already doing that. Last October, a leading evangelical Christian, Dr. Catherine Hale, spoke at the Earth-Keeping Summit here in Columbus, Ohio, sponsored by Ohio State Power Line. She directs the Climate Science Center at Texas University. Aside from being an evangelical Christian, she's one of the nation's top atmospheric scientists. And she's traveled the country to persuade her evangelical brothers and sisters, as well as anybody else who will listen, saying, well, in a nutshell, what Pope Francis said. Her primary purpose as she speaks is to persuade her fellow evangelicals of the truth of climate change and of our collective duty to address it. So the movement is underway. Most discussions around the world involve trying to persuade those in power who owe their power to money from corporations whose primary motive is profit to encourage baby steps. Encourage recycling and energy efficiency. Tell us we must change the way we do things, buy hybrid cars, eat less meat, use LED lights. They will surely eventually encourage support for renewable energy and perhaps even carbon taxes. What they will not do, and what members of communities of faith and ethical convictions around the country are insisting on now, is to amend the Constitution so that we, the people, return to our rightful position, to quote a certain recent political leader, as the deciders, placed at the head of our Constitution as government of our country. So for 5 years I've been involved with Move to Amend, and a coalition, as I said, of hundreds of thousands of individuals and organizations who are working on this. But, and here's where UUs come into this, in June of 2013, anybody here at Louisville GA? Okay, well, I hope you remember that we did something quite unusual. We passed an action of immediate witness that did not just go into a closet after it was passed. We passed an action of immediate witness that declared that as a denomination, as congregations, and as state action networks, we should support this movement specifically. Corporations are not persons, money is not speech. The State Action Network in Florida has taken this on. 22 of their congregations have passed resolutions about this. Several other states are doing the same. We have not been able to move in that direction here. That's one of my hopes coming out of this and subsequent discussions, is that Ohio should Move to Amend part of its objectives going forward.
I had a big disappointment at our church in Kent, which was that we failed to pass a resolution in support of the Move to Amend with the 85% supermajority that we needed. We tried to present it at the same time as a resolution in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think it was just too much for people all at once.
Yeah.
So neither one of them passed.
That's unfortunate. But try it again, because many churches say, well, that would affect our tax status. That's political. Not true. In an organization such as ours, a nonprofit, the rights of the organization are the result of, or come directly from the rights of the members, because it is we, the people, that have the rights. A corporation, with its sort of separation between people and the management, there's no similar relationship. Unions are the same as churches. There's a case in the South a few months ago where a city tried to get the NAACP to give them their membership rolls. And they said no. They took it to court. And the court agreed with them. But the judge said, in making the decision, you did not need to do this because, or your group, as a membership union, your members have the rights. So it was not necessary. Since then, we've been from a small group of UUs, we've spread around the country. There are 900 plus people on the UU Facebook page, 150 or so on the Interfaith Caucus, and I think we have on our database something like I'm sorry, it's 500 and something. UUs on the Interfaith Caucus tag for Move to Amend. That means they get all the information updating what's going on. Knoxville, 2013. So what's happening? What's underway right now? Around the country, churches and other organizations all have endorsed Move to Amend's proposal. Over 60 congregations have endorsed it, and a growing number of other entities, 600 cities and organizations. And here's the biggie: 17 state legislatures around the country have passed similar or equal the same resolution requesting a constitutional amendment. And that's never been in the news because national press media doesn't want that. Faith and ethical communities can lead the way in this. This is true democracy. The people speaking out and actively working for what they believe is right. And we, people of faith and ethical convictions, can lead the way. As we do, others will join us and change. The plausibility of the possible, you remember that? Is plausible. First into the probable, and then into reality. What can we do together? Let's talk about that now. We have people around the country of a number of different religions who are working with us all over the place. But I don't have an organization here in Columbus. You know, you're never a prophet in your own land, is what they say. And it's true. I need to have people here in Ohio working on this so that we can pull it together and also spread it out beyond. And here's the thing, it's vertical and horizontal. It's a nice concept available to anybody, or I can come and deliver it in your church. Say, go and talk to your other ex-denomination churches in the area and encourage them to go broader. That's the horizontal. Talk to interfaith groups. I'm the social justice moderator of the Interfaith Association of Central Ohio here in Columbus, and I'm beginning to introduce it to some of our Eastern religion compatriots. It's not easy because some people have a strong resistance to doing something that they consider to be political, even though this is nonpartisan and apolitical. At the same time, from the ground level, vertically, move upstream to the state synods and then to national headquarters. Online is the list of all the cities and towns that have passed it. You go to movetoamend.org/ I think it's resolutions.
Well,
let me go to Dick.
Now, Michael, are you familiar with The Virtues of Doubt, the book by Orestes, investigative reporters, a pattern of what's been going on for 50 years now? It started with tobacco and cancer, with acid rain, ozone depletion, and the latest is with Exxon and climate change.
Yeah.
They've been raising doubt. It's a pattern that's been going for 50 years now.
Of course, we all know the tobacco industry lying about the fact that tobacco did no damage and smoking is good for your health. That's been the traditional, and it can happen. Lying is legal. You know, a corporation can lie.
I know often when we're trying to convince somebody of something else, and you know, you have a short time before this person doesn't want to listen to what you're saying anymore. And so it's good to be concise, and it also helps if you have something really specific. And when you were talking about the takings clause, and you were talking about corporations claiming profits as a right, and then you link that to NAFTA. So I'm wondering, is there a very simple, specific, compelling example from the NAFTA where a corporation has used that argument that we could easily use in talking to people?
I'll go both ways, Canada to the States and the States to Canada. Okay. Soon after NAFTA was passed, a Canadian oil products company wanted to sell into California an additive to gasoline that they thought would be good for California. California had a rule against that specific chemical, and they said no. The company sued the state of California, and it was decided in favor of the corporation because California had invoked their laws which reduced the potential profit of this Canadian company. A few months ago, a fracking company applied to do fracking in the province of Quebec. The same thing happened in reverse. Quebec said no, and under NAFTA, the company sued the province of Quebec for lost profits. Of course, you don't hear about them much, you know why? Because the cases are done in secret.
From what you said then, a company can actually sue a government, be it state, local, whatever,
Yeah.
for failure to purchase their products.
Well, that's not what it says. It just says for restriction on profits. And I don't remember the exact wording, but it is lost because of lost profits, through provable or demonstrable lost profits. I wasn't able to sell this there, therefore I lost these profits and you're liable.
You have to be in the treaty to sue.
Well, the country does.
Yeah.
Now with TPP, anyway, they say NAFTA on steroids.
What's coming up in 2016? It's not just a presidential election. Every member of the Ohio General Assembly is up for election. And some of them are term limited. Last year, we conducted training for members of the congregation in Cleveland, in Columbus, and in Cincinnati, so that people would establish ongoing relationships with their representatives. That was our Meet Up for Justice campaign. And as a result of that, 40 people were trained. There were 6 meetings with lawmakers, and a Republican lawmaker from Dayton subsequently became the co-sponsor with our UU representative from Cleveland, Nikki Antonio, on a bill to abolish the death penalty. So that really felt good, that we learned the lesson. We don't have any permanent allies, we have no permanent enemies. That on some issues, we have a Republican governor who will favor Medicaid expansion, who will work for re-entry for returning citizens, who wants to reduce the prison population, not because of the reasons I like, but because of financial reasons, but so what? So we're going to have extraordinary opportunities in the coming year to interact with candidates. For president, the Republican National Convention will be in Cleveland in July, and the ACLU is anticipating the kind of situation they had in Chicago in 1968. And a lot of demonstrations. And we are anticipating racial justice activism. And we are going to have what they get in Iowa and New Hampshire, an opportunity to meet with presidential candidates. Because we are one of 5 states that make all the difference. Because of the Electoral College, this purple state of ours is up for grabs. And you need Ohio to win the presidential election. So after the candidates are nominated, they're not going to pay attention to 45 states. They're going to focus their energies in Ohio. So we will have opportunities to press them. And we want to advance our agenda on racial justice and other issues. Because the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act. And we need a Congress that will repair it. So there's going to be a very hotly contested race for the U.S. Senate seat. And the incumbent was shown to be trailing in the polls to the Democratic likely nominee. And out-of-state money started coming in to attack him. So we may have an opportunity at candidate forums to ask these candidates for Senate and for President what their stand is on the Voting Rights Act.
I know that we all know that issue 1 passed just recently, the redistricting, and that's a very good thing. Most of us probably also know that that doesn't go far enough, but it's a first step.
We need to get the congressional districts
right, so one of
next.
the main things is not the congressional districts. And we know that good government groups like the League of Women Voters, I believe, are pretty much planning on bringing an amendment in 2016 that will include redistricting reform for U.S. congressional districts. So I think that's going to happen, and which I'm sure...
We lost 3 times since 1980.
Right.
We only got 37% yes the last go around. So what a phenomenal bipartisan effort this was this year. It's a real win.
But some people that I know are trying to convince people that not only should it be extended to congressional districts, but right now, issue 1 won't make a difference until 2022.
Right.
And it's kind of like the argument of if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander, right? If it's a good thing, what is the reason to wait till 2022?
It's because it's constitutionally mandated that after every census.
Right, I understand that.
there'd be a
I understand that. But it could be put in the constitutional amendment that it starts in 2018.
That would be doing another whole statewide referendum.
Couldn't it be part of the one that adds the congressional districts? You just say,
Oh, yes.
We are going to do this, a constitutional
Yeah,
amendment,
sure.
and we are going to extend the process
If we
approved
get a ballot
by issue one
initiative
to do two things, to extend to U.S. congressional districts and to make all these changes happen for the first time
Good.
in 2018. That's 2 congressional cycles.
Yeah.
It's just an idea that
Yeah.
didn't originate with me, but that I think is a good idea, and
I
I'm
hadn't
interested
heard
in
that.
feedback as well as other people supporting that, especially if you belong to the League of Women Voters or some of the good government groups that are going to be working on this. If enough people say to them, hey, while we're at it, wouldn't it be simple to just put in to make this happen in 2018 instead of 2022 for this first time?
Good idea. Thank you for that. The other good thing we need to work for is a bill that's already introduced. It would permit online voter registration in Ohio. There are 13 other states that have it, and the District of Columbia. The way it's drafted, you have to have a photo ID, such as a driver's license, with your signature on file. So it will leave out 10% of the voters who don't have a signature on file. And the ACLU and the League, when they testified in the legislature, said, you ought to work it out so that it'll extend to everybody. But 90% is better than nothing. I mean, it would be really great if we could have online voter registration. We already have My Vote Ohio, the Secretary of State. You can change your address online. It's really very voter friendly. In some states, they have pre-registration for ages 16 and 17.
But automatic.
Yeah. But we have to recognize the lawmakers are moving in the opposite direction. The last go-around, they eliminated same-day registration and voting. They eliminated the early voting hours on weekends. They eliminated the evening voting hours. So the ACLU went to court, and they won back everything except the same-day voter registration. So we are back in business with having Sunday voting, where people can go after church, Saturday voting. So prior to the upcoming primary in March, Ohio has moved its primary up. So we will be much more important in the mix of actually selecting the candidates. It's going to be on March 15th this year, and there'll be a special election to replace John Boehner on that same date in his district.
I just want to share, when I lived in California, this was revolutionary to me, I loved it. For every election, local, state, federal, every registered voter had the entire packet, including bipartisan descriptions of all of the candidacies and different issues, in a full packet mailed to your home. You fill it out, you mail it back in, and you are done. You have voted in that election. Every single citizen who was registered to vote.
Well, what we get in Ohio is a letter saying, if you want an absentee ballot, let us know and we'll provide it. Here's the information. And there was an attempt to eliminate the funding for that in the budget. There was also an attempt in last year's budget to require out-of-state college students to expend up to $75 so they could get local certification. So UJO voiced its objections, our board endorsed the campaign, and the governor might not have vetoed that. So again, you can't judge what results you're going to get by the political party in all cases. And so we need to keep those doors open. The other bill pending in the legislature would require a photo ID. And it hasn't gone very far, but we need to stay tuned in on that and to try and block it should it advance. Well, this month's election in Hamilton County was filled with glitches. Instead of using the polling books, they had electronic check-in, and either the poll workers weren't properly trained, so they had to extend voting hours as a result of
that's right.
people
That's
being
right.
turned
I
away.
saw that.
Yeah.
Well, one thing, move to amend for this upcoming election next year is a program called Pledge to Amend, which is a program whereby we will go out to all candidates for a given office so that we're not being partisan and ask them if they will support a resolution to amend the Constitution. And then if we've done it that way, we can then publicize the results we get back. you know, these didn't respond to this person said they would.
That way the public knows who to
Yeah.
lobby.
Yeah.
So our racial justice campaign, which is Witnessing Race, Meet Up for Justice 2016, is to prepare us to engage with activists in the Black Lives Matter movement, with candidates, and to, in candidate forums, have questions that we wish to pose about the lethal use of force, body cams, sensitivity training, about voter suppression. So we want to be hosting candidate forums. We want to partner with other local organizations. The League frequently sponsors candidate forums. But we need to organize ourselves to be connecting with our lawmakers and building these relationships that will endure. We have a calendar of events, and we can publicize what's going on. But I've got to hear from you.